of the Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, cancel culture is a dangerous phenomenon. The total silencing and erasing of people and truths the progressives dislike. Americans are beginning to see what cancel culture is really about. A recent survey found that 64% of Americans now believe cancel culture is a threat to freedom. Cancel culture aims not only to cancel certain elements of society, but to replace them. Consider the following. For years, the political left has attempted to erase parts of our American history, especially our founding and the story of 1776. Why? Because their goal is replacement. In place of America's true history, the progressives want to push the 1619 Project. This false narrative presents students with an alternate history, an alternate reality, that our nation was founded not on the principles outlined in the Declaration of Independence, but instead on a racist pursuit of expanding slavery. Canceling 1776 makes sense only in the broader context of this effort to advance a false narrative. Other areas of curriculum are being canceled in favor of critical race theory. Just last week, the Biden administration announced that it will use taxpayer funds to push critical race theory in public schools across the nation. Critical race theory is the backdoor way to teach Marxism to students and adults in this country under the guise of pushing equity. In my state of Colorado, the oil and gas industry is being canceled. The goal? Replace it with Green New Deal objectives. Schools named after our founders must be renamed after liberal icons, according to the left. Professors and journalists who will not kowtow to the progressive agenda find themselves replaced in their jobs. Our list of examples could go on. I am joined tonight by my colleagues who wish to help expose cancel culture. The examples we will highlight touch on all aspects of cancel culture, but they all have one thing in common. In each instance, progressives seek to cancel, cut, censor, and silence so they can move to the next phase, replacement culture. Thank you, and I would like to yield to my good friend from Arizona, Mr. Biggs.
I thank the gentleman. You know, cancel culture is eroding the very foundation of who we are as an American people. Rowan Atkinson, the star of the British TV series Maigret, said, "It is like a medieval mob coming to burn witches." That's what the cancel culture is all about. How about taking an analogy from George Orwell's 1984 novel, where they take history and they throw it into a chute and they revise history constantly, and you can't even control what you think anymore. That's what cancel culture is becoming. How about from a book called The Girl with 7 Names, about a courageous young woman who escaped from North Korea, and she tells us how North Korea did the same thing. How about China under the Chinese Communist Party, as reported in the 100-Year Marathon by Mr. Pillsbury, who wrote that book. That's what we see happening, this attempt to erase who we are, individuals, and then replace them with something else. Let me give you some other examples. Pepe Le Pew, no longer tolerated by the left, by the woke mob. Miss Piggy, canceled. Dr. Seuss books, canceled. Here's some others. How about this one? The Goya Foods, because this guy had the temerity, Robert Uenua, who's the CEO of Goya Foods, had the temerity to support President Trump. So people attempted to boycott and cancel his business. Senator Josh Hawley writes a book. He's canceled because he says that he wants election integrity. How about Washington, Lincoln, and Jefferson? San Francisco erases those schools named after Washington, Lincoln, or Jefferson. Matthew Iglesias, the liberal opinion writer, resigned from Vox, a company that he co-founded, because his woke staff says, oh, he's too center-right. How about Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity, Laura Ingraham, all attacked for being conservative voices. And what is the attack? It is to silence conservative voices. The new rule is we will only be tolerant if you are accepting of our views. Not just accepting, If you comply, not just compliance, you bow to the tyrannical rules of the left. Gina Carano, the Mandalorian actress, she's fired by Disney because she says that being a Republican in 2021 is like being a Jew in Nazi Germany. So she's got to go. They cancel the action figure named after her. Adam Rubenstein, former New York Times reporter and editor, he's got to go because he lets Tom Cotton's piece get published in the New York Times. Oops, we can't have that. J.K. Rowling, the very successful author of the Harry Potter series, she is canceled because she has the temerity to suggest that transgender rights might endanger women's rights. You can't have any conflicting view out there. No, you can't do that. And then Mike Lindell, you know him. He's the My Pillow guy. He's on TV all the time advertising. You can't have him because he's a friend and supporter of Donald Trump and questions the election results. We have reached a point in our society where the left says if you do not bow your knee to what we say is the new norm and the only acceptable dogma, if you're heterodox in any way, we are going to cancel you, we will dox you, we will erase you, and that it cannot stand, and it will not stand. And this group, I thank the gentleman from Colorado, we will continue to fight this outrageous attack on who we are as an American people. With that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his remarks, and I recognize for a slightly different purpose the gentlelady from North Carolina who will tell us about a very sad circumstance in her home state of North Carolina. I recognize Congresswoman Fox.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my colleague for recognizing me tonight for a very short but very serious and solemn set of comments. Mr. Speaker, across America, law enforcement officers. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to pay tribute to two members of the Watauga County Sheriff's Office who lost their lives in the line of duty on April 28th. Sergeant Chris Ward, an 8-year law enforcement officer, and K-9 Deputy Logan Fox, a former deputy of the Ashe County Sheriff's Office, left an indelible mark on Watauga County. This is a tremendous loss not only for Watauga County, but also for law enforcement across the state and country. These two fallen heroes dedicated their lives to law enforcement, and many who knew them recognized that their passion for serving the community they were proud to call home was second to none. This Monday, a community day of remembrance in Boone, North Carolina was held in their honor. Businesses, organizations, and proud citizens of Watauga County came together to show their overwhelming support for law enforcement and first responders. Mr. Speaker, across America, law enforcement officers like Sergeant Ward and Deputy Fox wake up every day with one important goal in mind: fulfilling their duty to uphold law and order. These proud men and women leave for work knowing that they may not come home to their families, but still they answer the call to serve without a moment's hesitation. That level of commitment to one's duty and community is truly awe-inspiring, and I firmly believe that we owe law enforcement a profound debt of gratitude. Mr. Speaker, I will always support law enforcement across this country. They are the true gatekeepers of law and order, and they must be respected. Calls to defund the police from the left are egregious and divisive. That rhetoric is profoundly dangerous and is an insult to the men and women who work around the clock to protect us. God bless the countless law enforcement officers across this country and their families. We are forever grateful for the sacrifices you continue to make. And I yield back to my colleague from Colorado.
I thank the gentlelady from North Carolina and assure her that our thoughts and prayers are with her and the families of those who are fallen. I now recognize my good friend from Texas, Mr. Roy.
I thank the gentleman from Colorado. I thank him for organizing this important topic of conversation. And I thank the gentlelady from North Carolina for recognizing the law enforcement officers in her home state, much like the rest of our states, who put their lives on the line every single day to defend us, protect our communities. This is an important week, obviously, for law enforcement. And I think it's germane to the point that my friend from Colorado is making about canceling, because this whole notion of canceling isn't just about corporations. It's just not about technology. It's not just about Amazon. It's not just about Twitter and Facebook. It's about canceling the very people that are, like our friend from North Carolina was just talking about, these law enforcement officers, canceling police officers, canceling law enforcement, canceling those who are standing up and defending us every single day. We hear it. I had a little girl in my home district in Austin who wrote a project for her school in which she was outlining how she was upset about her father, her dad, who was a police officer, was being treated. And how when he would come home and he was despondent a little bit about the day because our law enforcement officers are being harassed, targeted, criticized, mocked, defunded. And this is purposeful. This is happening every single day, and we're literally working to cancel law enforcement. In Austin, Texas, they defunded police, $150 million. Now we've seen a 50% spike in homicides. We have homeless encampments all across the street. We have the 1999 levels of funding for police department for a city that's grown by leaps and bounds since then. This canceling of law enforcement leaves us at risk, and it undermines the very security of our communities. But it's real, and it's happening in real time. 20 major cities have cut police budgets. $1.7 billion has been cut from police departments nationwide. But it's not just law enforcement. We're talking about that here because of my friend from North Carolina. But it's about corporations. Our nation, we're sitting here in the people's house, in front of the American flag. And our nation right now is increasingly run by corporations more than the men and women who are in this body. I mean, think about it. We hardly ever meet. We never amend. We never debate. We never do any actual give and take here on the floor. We get up and speechify a little bit. Meanwhile, corporations are deciding who gets to get their voice heard. Corporations are deciding, by the way, what election laws are warranted in Georgia or Texas. Venerable corporations like Coca-Cola, Delta Airlines, Major League Baseball in the United States of America. Baseball has been politicized. Baseball. Can't even watch baseball with my son without having to figure out and worry about how he's going to be viewing America because Major League Baseball has decided it's more important to be woke and move the All-Star game from 50% black Atlanta to 10% black Denver. Why? So they go around patting themselves on the back in Colorado while they say, hey, look at me, I'm driving my Subaru and I've got an Apple sticker on my car. No offense to the gentleman from Colorado. Is that woke? Hank Aaron passed away this year. We could have celebrated his life with an all-star game in Atlanta, Georgia, and woke corporate Major League Baseball decides it's more important to make a statement about election laws in Georgia, which, by the way, the proposed laws are very little different than the laws in Colorado, as my friend from Colorado knows, but they wanted to make a statement through their corporate power and their woke corporate boards that are packed with all these elite Harvard Business School and Yale School of Business types that are going into these corporate boardrooms and trying to tell us how to live our lives in little old Texas or Georgia or Colorado. That's what we face with these corporations that are trying to tell us how to live. I appreciate my friend from Colorado pointing and giving us the time to focus on this important issue tonight. We've got to reclaim our ability to live free in this country. And we ought to ask ourselves that question more and more. Are we truly free? With wide open borders and 500,000 apprehensions and $30 trillion in debt and corporations telling us how to live our lives, are we truly free in this country? I think we ought to ask that question over and over and over. And I will yield back to my good friend from Colorado.
I thank my friend from Texas, and I appreciate the points that he made. I now want to recognize my friend from Tennessee, Mr. Green.
Thank you to my colleague and Mr. Speaker. Before I jump into my remarks, I'd like to echo what my colleague from Texas said. The interesting thing about the Major League Baseball decision is only 2 days before they decided that voter ID was too tough for them, they signed a deal with Tencent in China, where there is no elections whatsoever, and where they are committing cultural genocide against the Uyghurs, that wasn't good enough in Georgia. But they signed a deal for millions of dollars to support what's going on in China. Mr. Speaker, as a physician, I recognize that cancel culture is a sickness in our society. It's easy to diagnose, but we have to admit it's going to be difficult to cure because we're fighting the woke media and we're fighting the woke left. And the left is using cancel culture to tear our country apart in its quest for their version of a utopia. They demonize conservatives as enemy of a nation that we love and hold dear. But no one is safe from cancel culture, not even the liberals themselves. Who has advanced progressivism more than Barack Obama during his 8 years as president? No one. Yet leftists today are canceling Barack Obama, who was until recently their self-proclaimed hero. In his home state of Illinois, Thomas Jefferson Middle School was supposed to be renamed the Barack and Michelle Obama Middle School. That is, until the far radical left protested that Obama followed the laws in some instances by deporting illegal immigrants. God forbid that a president tasked in the Constitution to enforce the law actually enforces the law. So please, my colleagues on the left, tell me how my colleagues on the right are safe from cancel culture when your side of the aisle isn't even safe. Iconic figures on the left are being canceled. Just the other week, the famed atheist Richard Dawkins, who many fellow Christians and I find incredibly offensive for his bigoted attacks on our faith, was just canceled. Dawkins was stripped of his Humanist of the Year award that he received back in 1996. On what was he found guilty? He believed that a civil discussion on what constitutes gender was legitimate. Canceled. A professor even canceled lecturing on the writings of James Baldwin, known for his participation in the civil rights and gay liberation movements, because his students said it made them, quote, relive intergenerational trauma, end quote. Matthew Iglesias, the founder of the liberal news website Vox News, has been canceled simply because he didn't want to defund the police. Canceled. So again, my colleagues on the left, tell me how cancel culture doesn't exist. And tell me that conservatives aren't being attacked. And who are the conservatives getting canceled? Well, the left tried unsuccessfully, as was mentioned earlier, to cancel Goya Foods executive Robert Unanue because he supported Donald Trump. President Abraham Lincoln, who ended the Democrat Party's institution of slavery, is being canceled. Lincoln's general, President Ulysses S. Grant, canceled. Covington Catholic children, yes, I said children, were completely slandered with lies by the left-wing media simply because they happen to be wearing MAGA hats. Senate Democrats tried to cancel Justice Amy Coney Barrett because she actually believes what her Catholic faith teaches. Vice President Kamala Harris tried to cancel a lower court appointee just 3 years ago because he was a member of the Catholic charitable group Knights of Columbus. Apparently, they hold the controversial view that we shouldn't terminate the lives of innocent unborn children. Enough is enough. If we want our country to continue to prosper, we need to stop seeing each other as political enemies and candidates for cancellation. We need to remember the motto on the Great Seal. Above my head as I speak, e pluribus unum, out of many one. We are a nation of many different states and localities and ethnicities and religions and backgrounds and political beliefs. We need to stop focusing on our differences and start seeing each other as Americans once again, regardless of what we believe. Cancel culture is anti-American, and for the sake of our nation, it needs to end now. I urge my Democrat colleagues to join us in this. Your own icons are being canceled. You will be the next victim. You will be assimilated. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield.
I thank the gentleman for his impassioned remarks and great research. We could all learn a lot from that, and I appreciate it very much. I now recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Cloud.
Thank you, and thanks to the gentleman from Colorado for organizing this. This is an essential topic in this essential time that we find ourselves. We have a unique foundation in that our nation rests on the understanding that our inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are not a grant from this government, but rather a gift from God. Among these inalienable rights enshrined in our First Amendment is the freedom of speech. Indeed, the peace and tranquility of our entire republic rests on the understanding that the people have a right to have their voice heard. But we have entered into a most troubling time in our nation. For all the talk of unity by this current administration, this government has sought only conformity. In this chamber, we have witnessed the unilateral march of the extreme left legislation designed not to protect our liberties, but rather force the American people to conform to their extreme ideas of government-mandated social engineering and the restructuring of an economy from the most successful model in history to one of socialism, which has failed everywhere it's been tried. And then there's big tech, these companies that arose to prominence in an environment that only economic freedom and opportunity provides, have now embraced authoritarianism, fostering a world that's worse than the one they hoped to correct. They have selectively canceled conservative voices while allowing leftist members, even in this body, to repeatedly call for unrest in our streets and violence against dissenting voices. They have allowed their platforms to raise money to bail out violent rioters. These true insurrectionists who have called for an end to America, have burned our flags and literally taken over city blocks, declaring them autonomous to the United States. And yes, these big tech platforms continue to provide a platform for communist China, for terrorist groups and others to spew their propaganda. Then there's the multinational corporations who bought into this diabolical movement. They're either ignorant to history or simply care more about their quarterly earnings report than the liberty, opportunity, or personal prosperity of their neighbors, the American people. They'd rather cozy up to the powerful to gain access, to crush their competition, and to protect corporate profits than stand up for the very principles and economic opportunity that enabled their own success. They do a disservice to the people of this nation. The hypocrisy is not overlooked. To some in our nation who've experienced the relative peace and security that comes with being heirs of these blessings of liberty, these trends could seem novel or perhaps part of the natural ebb and flow of politics in a free society. Sometimes it's harder for us born here to see the signs. But some of the most compelling voices sounding alarm right now are the immigrants who've come here. I've spoken to many from Cuba, Ecuador, Iran, Venezuela, and they see the signs in a way that many of us do not. And they are fearful, angered, and heartbroken. Venezuela, just a few short years ago, was the economic jewel of South America. Today, it's a wasteland fraught with poverty, conflict, and oppression. A couple in my district came from Iran. They are terrified by what they are now seeing here. One of them liked a post about the killing of Soleimani and found her account temporarily halted on the platform. The irony is too rich. I spoke to a lady from Ecuador. She had come to this country at about 18 years of age with her family under severe persecution. She had fled the country to come here. She didn't refer to this as the United States of America. She said, "I come to freedom country. We have to do everything we can to protect freedom country." Those were her words. And so we know that while the terminology and the methods may be new, the cancel culture movement is hardly new to history. Despotic regimes have worked to silence dissent for millennia. What is different about this movement is the broad embrace of the movement by those in positions of power within the United States of America in order to consolidate political power or perhaps preserve their personal status quo, all at the sake of the liberties of their fellow citizens. Ronald Reagan reminded us that freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it to the children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed for them to do the same. Or one day we will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it was once like to live in the United States where men were free. It's time to restore power to the American people. It's time for people across this nation to stand up in boardrooms, in classrooms, in houses of worship, and in this hallowed chamber to stand up with courage to this evil movement. God forbid we be the generation that allows this precious and unique experiment in self-government, this imperfect but beautiful republic to sink, enveloped by the undertow of the forces of envy, strife, and division. Let us not let that happen. Let us be that generation, like generations before, that work toward that more perfect union, one that protects and preserves our beloved freedom country. Thank you. And I yield back to the gentleman.
I thank the gentleman from Texas, and now I recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Perry.
Well, I surely thank my good friend, the gentleman from Colorado, for the opportunity to speak and the importance of this subject. Ladies and gentlemen, in the 30s and 40s, they banned books. They burned books. And that was just what they had at the time, right? They weren't really banning the book. They were banning and burning the idea, the ideas, the differences of opinion. I submit to you that that fascist regime then is doing or did what this cancel culture is doing now, doing right now. We already talked about Major League Baseball canceling the All-Star game in Atlanta, canceling the game in Atlanta and acting like we don't know that there are more restrictive states elsewhere, including the state that it went to. It's absolutely ridiculous. Facebook canceled the Great Barrington Declaration, a declaration of medical professionals and scientists that declared that lockdowns have adverse effects on physical and mental health, and we'd be better served by focusing on the protection of people who face a high risk of mortality should they become infected. How dare they? How dare they not accept the narrative, the dogma, the groupthink? Who do they think they are? The Google fired employee Kevin Zernike for the crime. What was his crime? He held conservative views. How about the OSU coach, Mike Gundy? What was his crime? Wearing the wrong T-shirt while fishing. That's how absurd this gets, and it just keeps on going, ladies and gentlemen. It doesn't stop. Of course, President Trump, the President of the United States, canceled by big tech, banned from Twitter, likely permanently banned for Facebook, and has already been stated by the same companies doing business with, helping out the communist Chinese government oppress its citizens. The same companies that have the Ayatollah, he can freely transmit over their platform, no problem there. And it just keeps on going. I mean, the president, talked about hydroxychloroquine in the early stages of the pandemic as a potential solution treatment. Man, who knows? I mean, it's been around since the 1940s. How dare he? And how dare the doctors that believe in him and believe the same thing? Who do they think they are when the press and the cancer culture says no way? And of course, the worst of it, representative right here in this body, the gentlelady from Missouri, and 54 of her colleagues sought to cancel 140 members of Congress for objecting to the electors in several states due to the election irregularities and constitutional infractions in these states, including my home state of Pennsylvania. They introduced House Resolution 25, calling for the removal of those members from the House of Representatives. Oh, of course, they didn't bother telling you that they themselves objected to more states in 2016 than the Republicans in 2020. Canceled. Let's cancel them. Free speech has been canceled. If you want to protest and burn your city down, protest is great. Violence and rioting is not accepted except when it is. But think you're going to the church in the same town? Canceled. Right to protest. You can riot, yes, but come to the Capitol and address your grievances with your elected representatives? No. Ladies and gentlemen, cancel culture is a synonym for fascism. And the sooner we recognize it, the better off we're going to be at dealing with it, and the sooner we can get to it. With that, I yield back to my good friend from Colorado.
I thank the gentleman, and I thank the gentleman for not naming my home state as he was talking about the All-Star game, so thank you for that. I now recognize Mr. Tiffany for 5 minutes, and I thank him for joining us in this special hour.
Gentleman from Colorado, I do not like the cancel mob. I do not like the groupthink blob. We should not censor our own speech. That's not a habit we should teach. This isn't China or Iran. Free speech belongs to every man. This right belongs to women, too, to teachers, students, me, and you. Don't let them tell you what to say, or what to think, or how to pray. America's for you and me, for Dr. Seuss, not Jack Dorsey. I thank the Speaker for the time and hope you liked my free speech rhyme. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman and suggest he's in the wrong line of work. That was great. Thank you very much for that. I now recognize the gentleman, Mr. Clyde, for 5 minutes, and thank him for joining us today.
Thank you to the gentleman from Colorado for yielding time so I can participate in the special order on this very important and increasingly pervasive issue in our society, cancel culture. I hold very deep concerns about how this ugly movement is corrupting our youth and stands to seriously threaten the many core values shared by those in my district, those from North Georgia: altruism, patriotism, faith, and integrity, just to name a few. While calling people out on their actions and or behaviors is nothing new in our society, there is something inherently dangerous about fringe groups of people moving in a calculated manner to strip people of jobs, to strip businesses of revenue, and shutting down entire thought groups altogether without a fair and just consideration being afforded to the targeted party. Each of us has an understanding of what is right and wrong. Just as we, as lawmakers, have our own ideas for what's good policy and what's not, we can debate and defend our personal opinions and sincerely held beliefs all we want. But when rights enshrined by the Constitution are at risk, I believe we have a duty to step up and defend those rights. Whether we're talking about standing up for God-given, unalienable religious liberties, Second Amendment rights, or First Amendment protections, I wholeheartedly believe that we should also be pointing to the truth within the Constitution. You know, it's easy to point to the Constitution as a blanketed rationale for countless issues. Both sides do it, and I find it does the public a disservice at large on two fronts, especially when one side just doesn't tell the truth. For one, I believe blanketed statements pointing to enumerated rights inadvertently desensitizes Americans, especially our youth, to the importance of the Constitution. And secondly, we are not challenging ourselves to push beyond the emotional sphere of these issues and to think critically and analytically to find the truth. So we as conservatives need to stand up to cancel culture in two ways. First, the Constitution has provided the basis for which the canceled individual and the cancelor engage in debate to begin with. Second, we should be putting truth behind our decision to stand up in defense of those being targeted. For example, I stand here today to oppose the progressive push to cancel biological genders, to cancel religious liberties, and to cancel the Second Amendment. You know, probably the most bold example of cancel culture that I have ever seen is that of Facebook and Twitter trying to cancel the sitting president of the United States, Donald Trump. I stand in defense of biological genders because the truth is that women are biologically different from men. Young women should not have to compete against self-identified transgenders who are biological men. Moreover, the truth is that women are the bearers of life, and only women can give birth. Moms are moms. Call them what they are, not birthing people. How ridiculous is that term, birthing people? How about H.R. 5, the Equality Act? That was another brazen attempt by progressives to cancel biological sex by normalizing transgender equality. As I have said before and will say again, transgender medical treatment for children is child abuse, and any effort to normalize such treatments is a serious violation of the welfare and bodily integrity of our children. Allowing children to undergo life-changing alterations to their bodies should be a violation of the law, and the child abuser should be criminally prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. I oppose efforts by progressives to cancel religious liberties in their entirety. While I could speak at length about the various targets, of cancel culture that fall under religious liberties, there is no better example than the Democrats' bill on the floor this week, H.R. 1065, that blatantly and knowingly leaves out protections for religious entities, as prescribed under the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Under this act, a religious employer could have to consider allowing an employee to take paid time off to have an abortion procedure. While religious liberty protections are the center of this cancellation attempt, the truth is that an unborn child is a living human child, and we must protect it as such. I stand strong against the Democrats' all-out attack on the Second Amendment, because it is no secret they are trying to cancel Americans' right to keep and bear arms in a piecemeal manner. The truth is that law-abiding gun owners are not the perpetrators of violent crimes. However, law-abiding gun owners will bear the brunt of the impact from this ploy. The facts are on the side of the law-abiding gun owners. The Democrats know that, and they just can't stand it. That is why Democrats are rolling out rules to ban guns piece by piece so that guns in the homes of Americans, as we speak, become outlawed over time. They do this under the guise of abolishing firearms made at home by individuals by calling them ghost guns. The truth is that we see through this thinly veiled facade, and we will not sit by and allow them to cancel our rights. Finally, I challenge all my colleagues to not just stand up to the cancel culture in the name of the Constitution, but to do so by adding truth to the dialogue. And with that, I yield back, sir.
I thank the gentleman. I now recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Daniels, for 5 minutes.
I want to thank the gentleman from Colorado for the time. I'll also tell you, Mr. Speaker, it's actually good to be able to talk in this chamber without that thing on my face. It's messing up the enunciations. Mr. Speaker, my colleagues have talked at length about all of the examples and all of the damaging aspects of cancel culture. And I don't want to go through and reiterate those points. I think the purpose I want to take this time to do, Mr. Speaker, is to actually have a pleading with the people of our country. You see, if you look at the history of world governments, even go before our own government, the ability to speak has been sacrosanct in order for the ability to be free. You see, there was a time under the brutality of European kings where you could dare not speak a word against the crown. If you did, you were slaughtered, you were maimed, you were put into chains, you were put into slavery. The very idea of freedom of speech canonized in our Constitution just wasn't created by our framers. It is something our framers understood and they studied from their view of world history. And that very protection is the one thing, the most paramount thing, that the members of this body, whether they be in our House, the Senate, or the person who occupies the White House at any point in time in American history, can never abridge or infringe. And the reason for that is very simple, because the thoughts that roll around in your mind are yours alone. They are your thoughts. They were given by God. They are given by your own intellect. And your ability to express them should never be taken away or shamed by a government or by a sect or a substructure of any society, let alone American society. You see, Mr. Speaker, we've come to a very dangerous point in our politics. This has nothing to do with Social Security and Medicare, which, by the way, for the American people, are going to go insolvent in somewhere between 5 and 7 years. This isn't about our issues talking about guns and supporting the Second Amendment. This isn't about if you want to talk about green technology or embracing fossil fuels or actually embracing nuclear power, which is what we should be doing as a country. This isn't our views on what we do with respect to foreign policy and who our adversary might be. This goes to the very core of our country. It goes to the very core of our culture. It goes to the very core of whether our society will have the ability to sustain itself for another 200 years into the future. But I'll promise you this, Mr. Speaker, it will not be possible if we have one group of Americans telling another group of Americans that what they say should no longer be heard simply because they don't agree or even if they're offended, or even if what somebody says is so vile that unilaterally every American finds it to be distasteful and doesn't want to hear it. You see, the very thought of any individual must be protected at all times. It is what separates our country from the other countries of the world today and the other societies on our earth in years past. It is what creates the very foundation of a republic of people to be able to grow, to see, to do, to be their best, because they are free, and there is no government that can oppress them. The only example I'm going to cite tonight is the example of somebody who's actually not on my side of the political aisle. She's a reporter, Alexi McCammond. And Alexi, just so you know, I'm not bringing your situation up to make a political point. Far from it. You see, she was a journalist. She was on an MSNBC and an NBC contributor. I don't think she would probably like my politics too much. But because of something she said when she was a freshman in college on social media, she was targeted. She was canceled. She had reached a pinnacle in her career through her hard work. I don't even know her, but I know that she was able to accomplish something. But because somebody in her company, because of somebody at Teen Vogue decided that they didn't like what she had said, she became the new target. Mr. Speaker, and frankly, my fellow Americans, we cannot continue as a society if we are quick to shut each other down before we actually decide to open up our ears and listen. There are so many debates on this very floor that are going to take place, not just in this Congress, but in many Congresses to come. There are going to be disagreements in our society, whether you're talking about policing or racism or the past or the future. But the one thing that must remain in our republic is tolerance. You see, Mr. Speaker, we have to adopt a standard, not a subjective one, but an objective one. But here's the truth. We already have had that standard. We've already adopted it. It is the objective standard that you are free to speak in the United States of America. And whether it's Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, or YouTube, or Snapchat, or TikTok, or the Washington Post, or the Washington Times, whether you want to talk about the New York Times, or you want to talk about RedState.com, you want to talk about MSNBC or Fox News, The Morning Joe or Sean Hannity, we must be free to speak at all times, because the battlefield of ideas is the only thing that's going to propel our republic forward. It is the only thing that's going to allow young kids to grow and actually increase their intellect and to be able to transform our economy in ways that none of us in this Capitol today can even fathom. It is the very basis of what makes our nation the greatest nation. It's what makes us unique. It's what allows us to be able to fight it out every day on this floor. Verbally, of course, Mr. Speaker. My fellow Americans, we're all in this together. Mr. Speaker, we're in this together. We can't cancel each other. We can't move people out of the public square because we find their ideas even vile or distasteful. I may not like what you have to say, Mr. Speaker. We may disagree on votes on this very floor, but the one thing I will always respect, the one thing I will always defend, is your ability to say it and your ability to vote that way. My only ask is that you do the same for people on my side of the political aisle. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his profound remarks.